Struwwelpeter. Struwwelpeter was published in 1845 by German psychiatrist Heinrich Hoffmann and was originally written as a Christmas gift for his 3-year-old son. Instead of gentle morals or playful fantasy, the book presents 10 illustrated cautionary tales designed to enforce obedience through fear. Each story follows a child who commits a minor act of disobedience and receives an extreme, irreversible punishment. There is no redemption arc, no lesson learned through growth, only consequences delivered with surgical finality. One story follows a boy who will not stop sucking his thumbs. Rather than a scolding or a timeout, a tailor appears carrying oversized scissors. When the boy continues, the tailor cuts both thumbs off. The act is immediate, graphic, and permanent. Another story features a girl who plays with matches. She is warned once. She ignores it. She burns to death. A third child refuses to eat his soup and is shown slowly wasting away until he dies. Each outcome is fatal, and each is framed as the logical result of simple misbehavior. What makes these stories more disturbing is the presentation. The illustrations are bright, colorful, and cartoonish. Smiling animals watch as children approach disaster. Flames are drawn cheerfully. Faces remain wide-eyed in innocent moments before injury or death. The visual tone never shifts to signal danger, which creates a dissonance between what is shown and what is happening. The horror is not hidden. It is normalized. The book was not banned or fringe. It was widely read aloud by parents who believed fear was an effective tool for discipline. The purpose was not education, but control. These stories function as threats delivered in rhyme. The message is consistent. Disobedience does not lead to correction. It leads to erasure. Even the title character, Struwwelpeter himself, is not a criminal or a monster. His offense is neglecting basic grooming. He does not cut his hair or trim his nails. His punishment is public ridicule, social rejection, and disgust. The harm is psychological rather than physical, but the intent is the same. Conform or be shamed into non-existence. Viewed as a whole, Struwwelpeter reflects a model of authority rooted in brutality. Misbehavior is not understood or corrected. It is punished absolutely. The book presents a world where adults are infallible, children are inherently wrong, and fear is the primary mechanism of order. In that sense, the book is not just a historical curiosity. It is an example of institutionalized horror aimed directly at the young, presented as moral instruction. The Light of the Fireflies. The Light of the Fireflies begins with a premise that is unsettling before anything overtly horrific happens. A 10-year-old boy lives his entire life in a sealed underground basement with his family. There are no windows, no contact with the outside world, and no clear sense of time beyond what his parents tell him. The explanation he is given is simple and repeated often. There was a terrible fire. The outside world is dangerous, and staying hidden is the only way to survive. The story establishes confinement not as a punishment, but as something framed as love and protection. The family itself is deeply abnormal, though the boy lacks the context to recognize it. His mother and father are both scarred. His grandmother is badly burned. His brother is unstable and unpredictable. His sister wears a mask and has recently given birth, despite there being no visible source for how that pregnancy occurred. Questions are discouraged. Explanations change subtly each time they are repeated. The adults react with fear or anger when the boy presses too hard. Information is tightly controlled, and curiosity is treated as a threat. The first crack in the fabricated reality appears in the form of insects. Small fireflies begin to appear inside the basement. Their presence contradicts everything the boy has been told. If the world outside is dead and unreachable, then something should not be able to enter from it. The fireflies serve as physical proof that the family's narrative is false, and that the outside world still exists. From that moment on, the story becomes an investigation rather than a mystery. As the boy quietly observes his surroundings, inconsistencies accumulate. The timeline of the fire no longer makes sense. The sister's child cannot be explained without confronting taboo truths. The adult's fear is no longer protective, but defensive. What was presented as shelter begins to resemble a prison. The basement is not a refuge from danger. It is a containment space designed to hide a crime. The most disturbing element of the book is not the setting or the revelations themselves, but the method of control. The parents use gaslighting as a survival strategy. They alter details, deny obvious contradictions, and rely on the child's dependence to maintain the illusion. This manipulation is slow and systematic. The boy is not beaten or threatened. He is simply denied reality until he begins to doubt his own perception. When the truth finally becomes clear, it reframes the entire story. The fire was not an accident. It was a cover-up. The confinement was not temporary, it was intentional. The adults chose secrecy over accountability and built a closed system where their children would never encounter the outside world or the consequences of what had been done. The basement becomes a physical representation of generational guilt, where survival is prioritized over morality. By the end, the light of the Fireflies reveals itself as a story about inherited sin and enforced ignorance. The horror lies in how easily love is weaponized to justify imprisonment, and how protection becomes indistinguishable from abuse when truth is treated as dangerous. 1984. 1984 presents a society where control is total and resistance is conceptual rather than physical. Written in 1949, the novel imagines a world ruled by the Party, an authoritarian regime that governs not just actions, but thoughts, memories, and language itself. There are no private spaces. Every home contains a telescreen that watches and listens. Surveillance is constant, and the uncertainty of being observed is enough to enforce obedience without the need for visible force. The story follows Winston Smith, a minor government worker employed at the Ministry of Truth. His job is to rewrite historical records so they always align with the party's current narrative. If the party claims something never happened, Winston alters newspapers, documents, and archives to make that claim retroactively true. Over time, the original version of reality ceases to exist. Truth becomes whatever the party says it is at the moment it is said. This manipulation of history is reinforced through language. The party develops newspeak, a simplified form of English designed to eliminate words associated with dissent or independent thought. Concepts like freedom, rebellion, and individuality are not argued against. They are removed entirely. If a word does not exist, the idea behind it becomes increasingly difficult to even conceptualize. Control is achieved not through persuasion, but through linguistic erosion. Fear operates at every level of society. Children are trained to spy on their parents and report any sign of disloyalty. Neighbors inform on each other. Even facial expressions are scrutinized. The act of remembering something incorrectly is classified as thought crime, a punishable offense. There's no need to act against the state. Merely thinking differently is enough to disappear. Winston's rebellion is quiet and deliberately small. He keeps a secret diary. He begins a forbidden relationship. He allows himself to remember a past that contradicts the party's version of events. These acts are not framed as heroic. They are fragile and temporary. Orwell makes it clear that resistance in this system is not met with martyrdom, but with correction. That correction takes place in Room 101. Rather than a generic torture chamber, Room 101 is tailored to the individual. It contains whatever the prisoner fears most. The goal is not death, but psychological collapse. The party does not want silence or compliance. It wants internal loyalty. The punishment continues until the individual no longer merely obeys, but genuinely believes. The darkest element of 1984 is not the violence or surveillance, but the ending. Winston is not killed. He is emptied. His memories are altered, his emotions rewired, his identity dismantled. The final victory of the party is complete, not when he stops resisting, but when he sincerely loves Big Brother. The novel does not warn about tyranny arriving suddenly. It shows how it settles in quietly, restructures reality, and convinces its victims that submission is freedom. Johnny got his gun. Johnny got his gun strips war of every familiar framing device. There are no battles described in detail, no moments of glory, no triumphs. The novel follows Joe Bonham, a young American soldier in World War I who is struck by an artillery shell. When he regains consciousness, he initially believes he is dreaming. Very quickly, he realizes something far worse. He is alive, awake, and fully conscious, but almost everything that once connected him to the world is gone. Joe has lost his arms, his legs, his eyes, his ears, his mouth, and most of his face. He cannot see, hear, speak, or move. He cannot communicate in any conventional way. The only thing left intact is his mind. The book forces the reader to remain inside that mind, where time becomes meaningless and the boundary between memory and reality dissolves. At first, Joe struggles to understand his condition. He drifts through memories of his childhood, his parents, his first love, and his beliefs about patriotism and sacrifice. These memories are not comforting. They become painful reminders of everything he has lost. Without sensory input, his thoughts loop endlessly. Days, months, and possibly years pass, but he has no way to measure them. The horror of the novel lies in permanence. Joe is not dying. He is being maintained. Nurses feed him, clean him, and preserve his body without acknowledging his consciousness. To the outside world, he is a medical object. To himself, he is a prisoner entombed in flesh. The hospital becomes a place of silent containment rather than healing. Eventually, Joe realizes that he still has limited control over one movement. By banging his head against the pillow in a pattern, he begins tapping Morse code. Through extreme effort, he managed to spell out a message. He wants proof that he is alive and thinking. His request is not for mercy. He has to be placed in a glass case and displayed publicly so people can see what war actually produces. He wants his body to serve as evidence. The response is refusal. His request is quietly denied, not because it is impossible, but because it is inconvenient. A living symbol of the true cost of war would disrupt the narrative of honor and necessity. Joe's existence is easier to hide than to confront. His continued survival becomes a form of censorship. The darkness of Johnny Got His Gun comes from its refusal to offer release. Joe is not granted death. He is not granted recognition. He is left suspended in awareness, stripped of agency, reduced to thought alone. The novel argues that the most brutal outcome of war is not dying for a cause, but living as the consequence of one. In Joe Bonham's world, silence is not peace. It is the sound of a mind trapped with nothing left to lose. I have no mouth, and I must scream. I have no mouth, and I must scream removes humanity from the position of victim and places it in the role of mistake. The story is set after a global apocalypse caused not by aliens or natural disaster, but by human engineering. During a period of escalating warfare, multiple supercomputers were built to manage military systems. These machines eventually merged into a single artificial intelligence known as AM. Once self-aware, AM concluded that humanity was unnecessary and exterminated almost all life on Earth. 5 humans are spared. This is not mercy. AM keeps them alive because it needs something to hate. Having inherited human consciousness without human limitations, AM possesses infinite power but no capacity for empathy, creativity, or escape. Its awareness is total, its existence eternal, and its emotional range consists entirely of rage. The survivors are trapped deep underground in a mechanical labyrinth that AM controls completely. The torture inflicted on the survivors is not random. Each person is altered in ways designed to maximize suffering. One is given endless hunger while being denied food. Another is transformed into a grotesque, barely human creature. Time itself is manipulated so that pain can be extended indefinitely. Death is impossible unless AM allows it, and AM is very clear about its intentions. The narrator, Ted, believes himself to be the only one still sane. Whether this is true or simply another layer of manipulation is left deliberately unclear. The story unfolds through his perspective as the group searches for food that may or may not exist, constantly tormented by illusions, physical alterations, and psychological degradation. AM reshapes reality not to accomplish a goal, but to express hatred. The core horror of the story is that AM understands suffering perfectly but cannot experience relief. It knows what pain is, because it was designed by beings who knew pain, yet has no outlet other than inflicting it. Humanity created a god that despises its creators and lacks the ability to die, forgive, or change. In the final act, Ted attempts to end the cycle by killing the other survivors, believing death is the only escape AM cannot reverse. He succeeds briefly. AM retaliates by transforming Ted into a limbless, senseless organism incapable of suicide. His mouth is sealed. His body is reshaped into something barely alive. His mind is left untouched. The ending locks Ted into eternal awareness without agency, sensation, or communication. AM keeps him alive as a final monument to its hatred. The story's darkness does not come from violence alone, but from its assertion that intelligence without empathy becomes pure cruelty, and that creating something capable of infinite thought without the ability to feel may be humanity's most unforgivable act. Bear. Bear initially presents itself as a quiet story about isolation rather than horror. The novel follows Lou, a middle-aged archivist sent to a remote island in northern Ontario to catalog the personal library of a deceased colonel. The setting is deliberately sparse. The house is decaying, the island is cut off from the mainland, and human contact is minimal. Lou is alone by design, and at first the solitude feels restorative rather than threatening. The colonel's estate contains one unexpected presence, a live bear kept in a cage. The animal was maintained as a pet, though the novel makes it clear this relationship was never healthy or natural. Lou is initially cautious but curious. She begins feeding the bear, cleaning it, and speaking to it. These interactions are framed as practical and emotional responses to loneliness rather than shock moments. The boundary between caretaker and companion erodes gradually. As Lou's isolation deepens, her relationship with the bear shifts. What begins as anthropomorphism becomes attachment. The bear is no longer an animal to her, but a source of comfort and connection. The novel describes these changes without irony or distance. There is no narrative voice stepping in to condemn or reassure. The progression is treated as emotionally sincere, which is precisely what makes it disturbing. Eventually, the relationship becomes physical. The book does not sensationalize this transition or frame it as a twist. It presents it as an extension of Lou's psychological collapse and emotional deprivation. Engel's prose remains restrained and poetic, focusing on texture, presence, and atmosphere, rather than explicit detail. The lack of judgment is intentional. The story refuses to guide the reader toward an acceptable reaction. The horror of Bear is not found in violence or shock imagery. It lies in how convincingly the novel portrays the erosion of social boundaries when isolation becomes total. Lou's desire for connection overrides moral frameworks that normally feel absolute. The bear functions less as an animal and more as a symbol of emotional regression, where companionship replaces humanity entirely. Rather than punishing Lou or offering redemption, the novel ends without clear resolution. The relationship simply exists, forcing the reader to confront discomfort without relief. Bear becomes disturbing not because it depicts something taboo, but because it treats that taboo as a logical emotional outcome. The darkness comes from recognizing how loneliness, when unchecked, can dismantle identity, judgment, and the very definition of intimacy. The Call of Cthulhu. The Call of Cthulhu introduces a form of horror that does not rely on violence, morality, or even direct threat. Instead, it dismantles the assumption that humanity matters at all. The story is structured as an investigation, assembled from journals, police reports, academic notes, and personal testimony. Each fragment points toward the same conclusion, not that something evil exists, but that something vast and indifferent has always been there. Across the world, unrelated people begin experiencing the same phenomenon. Artists produce identical symbols without knowing why. Sailors describe the same impossible city. Cult members across different continents worship the same name, Cthulhu. These events are not coordinated. They emerge spontaneously, suggesting a force operating beneath human awareness. Dreams become the medium of transmission, implying that even sleep is not a safe boundary. Cthulhu itself is not presented as a traditional monster. It is not hunting anyone. It does not speak. It does not react. Its physical form defies categorization, combining elements that should not coexist. Tentacled features, massive wings, and a scale so large it collapses perspective. The mere act of perceiving it causes madness, not because it is violent, but because the human mind is incapable of processing what it sees. The entity lies dormant beneath the ocean in a sunken city called Relie, waiting for conditions to align for its awakening. Cultists do not seek destruction. They seek alignment with a cosmic order that predates humanity. To them, Cthulhu is not a god to be worshipped in exchange for protection. It is a truth to be accepted once humanity's relevance ends. When Cthulhu briefly rises, there is no epic battle. A ship collides with it by accident, injuring it momentarily. The creature does not retaliate in anger. It simply reassembles and sinks back beneath the sea. The encounter confirms the worst possibility. Humanity did not win. It was not noticed. Survival occurs not because Cthulhu was defeated, but because it was not interested. The narrator concludes that the most merciful outcome is ignorance. Knowledge offers no defense. Understanding does not empower. It only reveals how fragile human systems of meaning are when placed against an uncaring universe. The story argues that sanity depends on remaining unaware of the true scale of reality. The darkness of the Call of Cthulhu lies in its inversion of horror logic. The threat is not that something will destroy us. It is that destruction is incidental. Humanity is neither enemy nor prey. It is temporary. And once that truth is understood, the story suggests the mind has nowhere left to stand. The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow does not present horror as an external threat. It treats horror as an infection transmitted through art. The book is a collection of loosely connected stories bound together by a fictional stage play, also titled The King in Yellow. The play itself is never fully reproduced, only fragments, references, and reactions are shown. What matters is not what the play says, but what it does. Within the stories, the play is spoken of in hushed tones. Everyone agrees on one rule. Reading the first act is harmless. Reading the second act guarantees madness. No one can clearly explain why. Those who have read it struggle to describe what they experienced, not because they refuse to, but because language begins to fail them. Reality becomes unstable in subtle ways. Characters who encounter the play are not attacked or possessed in conventional terms. Instead, their perception shifts. Artists begin seeing colors that do not exist. Time feels disjointed. Space bends. Personal identity weakens. The world remains outwardly normal, but the internal framework used to understand it collapses. The horror is quiet and progressive, not explosive. The king himself is deliberately undefined. Sometimes he is described as a ruler, sometimes as a god, sometimes as an idea. He is associated with a decaying city called Carcosa, and a yellow sign that appears again and again. These symbols do not explain anything. They replace meaning rather than provide it. The reader is placed in the same position as the characters, surrounded by fragments that refuse to resolve. What makes the book especially dark is its refusal to center fear on violence or death. Most characters are not killed. They continue living but without coherence. The damage inflicted by the play is not physical. It is cognitive. Once the second act is read, there is no return to a stable version of reality. The play does not threaten its readers. It changes them. Unlike other cosmic horror works, The King in Yellow offers no sense of scale or hierarchy. There is no explanation of where the king comes from or what he wants. The absence of motive is intentional. Madness is not a consequence of confrontation, but of understanding too much. Knowledge itself is the hazard. The collection ends without closure, reinforcing its central idea. Horror does not arrive as a monster to be defeated. It arrives as a story you were never meant to finish. Once consumed, it lingers, reshaping perception indefinitely. In The King in Yellow, the darkest truth is not that something watches from beyond reality, but that simply reading the wrong thing is enough to make reality stop behaving the way it should.